If you'll notice, I've got some new friends here that I got for Christmas. Hello, YouTube, and welcome back to the channel. Super exciting MASH shirt on that I got for Christmas. Look at this. Look how cool this is. It's got all their pictures and all their autographs on it. So if this is any indication of what we're going to be talking about today, we are going to be talking about MASH, the TV show, and some interesting facts that I found out. And if I look down, it's because I'm looking at them on my phone. So these are just some random facts that I have found. I found an article that was like 12 facts you didn't know about MASH or something. I'll have it linked down below. I believe I still have that hyperlink. But I found some of these facts on there, and some of them I've known. So I'll have that down in the down bar as well as some other stuff to look out for. So with that, let us get into the first fact. So the first fact is that Charles Emerson Winchester III, or David Ogden Stiers, didn't actually have a Boston accent. He had to have that accent put on because he was born in Illinois, and he wanted to have the persona of Charles to be, aristocrat, very stuck up, look down your nose type of guy, as he is in the TV show. So that's why he decided to give him the accent that he does.
And what's very interesting
about that is he's the only MASH character to have a made-up accent, which
is interesting.
But some other things that you may not know is he has played a ton of voices on Disney.
And that is actually interesting
because at the time, I cannot remember where I read it, but he was gay. He died recently. I forget when. But he didn't want to... I'm going to say this wrong. I don't mean to. But it was something along the lines like he didn't want his voice to be too flamboyant or anything because he was gay. I don't know. I'm going to have to find that somewhere, but I've read that somewhere. But regardless of that, he has been in a ton of Disney movies and stuff. Some of them I knew and some of them I didn't know. So just to let you know, he has voiced 5 Disney films. One of them was Pocahontas. He was in the original, and then the sequel, Journey to a New World, he played Governor Ratcliffe, that's very prominent. You can hear him in it. If you know MASH like I do and his voice, you can hear it. And I believe that he also, who is the guy, Ratcliffe's little sidekick with the red hair? I forget his name, but he also voiced him. It's not really listed, but I did read that. He was the voice of him, too. It's like Quigley or Quisley or something like that. But he was that voice. He played Cogsworth in the original Beauty and the Beast and all of the little films and stuff surrounding Beauty and the Beast. The one that stuck out to me the most, because it's another thing that I have grown up with, is he is the voice of Jumba Jookiba in Lilo and Stitch, like the movie and the TV series, which again, if you know him, you can hear it. Like as soon as I found out, I was like, yeah, that's Charles. But along with that, he was also the Archdeacon in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and he was Mr. Harcourt in Atlantis. So those are like the prominent Disney films that he had a voice in. But the next fact that I want to talk about, just because he was one of my favorite characters, is Corporal Maxwell Q. Klinger. I honestly have no idea. Well, I think it started because how I found MASH was I watched Match Game and Password with my grandparents growing up after school, and I saw Gary Berghoff, who's Radar, and Jamie Farr, who plays Klinger, on there, and I was like, oh, who are they on? And they're like, oh, that's MASH. That was a big TV show, and then that's how I got started watching MASH, so I kind of relate Jamie Farr to me starting to watch MASH, so I guess that's why he was my favorite. But Klinger was one of my favorite characters growing up, and anyone that knows the show knows that at the beginning, I don't want to, like, he did cross dress, but it was, at the time, it was the 1950s. There wasn't a big LGBTQ movement or anything back then. So he thought that he could get a Section 8 or be honorably discharged from the Army if he thought that he was a woman. But he didn't really execute that well because everyone that knew him knew that he was wanting to be crazy. And even like the psychiatrists and stuff that he talked to, he would tell them he was crazy. So it didn't really work out for him. But there was a few seasons, I forget exactly when Radar left, but there was several seasons where Klinger took on this persona of cross-dressing and being in woman's clothes, and he actually had some really pretty outfits, not gonna lie. But whenever Radar leaves the show and Klinger takes over for him, he stops cross-dressing. And it was like I noticed that, but I didn't really put like a big emphasis on that when I was watching until I read Jamie Farr's biography back in like 8th grade, which if I can find it again for sale, I'll have it linked down below. That was a really entertaining read. I highly recommend it. But he talked about how once Klinger got into this position of importance, he had a big role, he wanted to stop cross-dressing because he didn't want his kids at the time to be bullied because their father was wearing women's dresses. Again, this is at a time that all of that was still kind of taboo, so just kind of realize that. But that's why they stopped doing that, is because Jamie Farr didn't want his kids to have been bullied. But Klinger is one of my favorite characters. So
I had to put that fact in because I found that interesting.
So something else that I have, and this kind of correlates to this show in general, B.J. Honeycutt, who's played by Mike Farrell, he actually inspired his character from Patch Adams. And one thing about MASH in general, I actually read this from one of Alan Alda's biographies, was like, Never Stuff Your Dog. I think that's what it's called, that I read recently. But they took a lot of inspiration from Army, like past veterans in the Korean War, and they took a bunch of their stories and implemented it into the show. And he talks about that too in his book, so I'll have that link down below as well if you're a MASH fan, because I loved that section so much. It was great. But that's because they wanted MASH to be as realistic as possible. And one of their consultants was Dr. Patch Adams, who is a well-renowned doctor, and he advocates for change. And so Mike Farrell actually became friends with him and would consult him and used some of his stories and his performances as BJ. This one really stuck out to me when I saw this because I just couldn't believe this. But if you know, I cannot remember, does this say what? It was in the 5th season is when this says, but I can't remember the season name. But there's an episode of MASH where there was like a hepatitis breakout, and it starts with Father Francis Mulcahy, who is played by Bill Christopher. He is so adorable on that show. His character is so funny. And I think he may have been on Password one time too. I think.
But what's interesting is that
whole show came around because he actually contracted hepatitis in real life. And so he missed a lot of episodes, which makes sense because there was a time on the show when Father Mulcahy wasn't in it a lot, and I was wondering where he went, so that's what, and the producers were going to let him go. But then Alan Alda stepped in, which I love him, and knew that Christopher needed to be in the show and have like a steady job and everything. So he wrote the episode Hepatitis, where Father Mulcahy has hepatitis. So Bill Christopher was able to overcome the hepatitis and stay for the remaining of the series. So kudos to Alan Alda for writing that episode, which I'll talk more about him when we get to some Hawkeye facts. But that one, to me, when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, because that episode sticks out in my mind so much. So that was really cool. So I guess let us talk about another one of my favorite characters, Henry Blake, who is entirely different from who they get later to replace him in Colonel Potter. But I love Colonel Potter too. But they're two entirely different characters, and they each have their good points, and they both have their flaws. But Henry's just so funny. And McLean Stevenson has been on a ton of episodes of Password, and he acts just like Henry Blake in real life. So he's just so funny. But there has been some controversy over his demise from the show. There has been speculation that the producers killed him off because they didn't want him to come back, and they didn't like Blake because of contract. And so that's basically why he got killed off. Apparently, his death was the studio's retaliation for his demands for better pay and treatment, but the other cast say that that's otherwise, and that he was like the father figure of the entire cast. And then there's also speculations that Stevenson wanted to leave the show, so they wrote his death out of spite. But that is not true. One of the writers, I guess, he has a big part in the show, is Larry Gelbart, and he actually disclaimed that legend and said having Henry die was not a show business decision. We were not punishing an actor for leaving the series. We were trying to make his departure one that would be apt as well as memorable. So there's still controversy around that. Like, he could have just been saying that, but I don't know. It's still a sad moment either way. Like he was finally free, and then he died, and just their reactions and everything. That's one of the saddest moments of television history. Again, every single time. Every time. Oh, speaking of Henry Blake, for those, again, that watch the show, he loved to fish. He always had that fishing hat on, which is so funny. Like, growing up, I wanted one of those hats, not going to lie. And it's just, he knew that he loved to fish. And I found out something that just made me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. There is actually like a little nod to Henry Blake in Red Dead Redemption. So, for those of you who have not played the game, Red Dead Redemption is set during the Wild West. I am playing it. I've stopped recently for a little bit because I just got GTA 5 and I've been playing it nonstop. But there is a town in there called St. Denis. It says Red Dead Redemption, but the picture kind of looks like Red Dead Redemption 2. So, I don't know which series that is. I'm going to have to look at that. But there is a store in the town of St. Denis that says H. Blake Fishing Tackle Maker. Like, they named a fishing store after Henry Blake. That is so cool. I love to see stuff like that. So,
I thought that was really interesting
to see. So the last two facts that we have are about Hawkeye, played by Alan Alda, which, if you don't know, he is tattooed on my leg. I have a whole video on that, which I'll have in the cards somewhere, talking about my tattoo. But there is, I get like a conspiracy theory, but not really, that Hawkeye worked in Cook County General Hospital after the war. And the reason people say that is because the way MASH ends, it's the end of the war, everybody's going their separate ways, so the audience gets to decide what happens to everyone, because it doesn't really say, after they left what happened. And so they think that Hawkeye continued into ER, because on that show, Alan Alda portrayed Gabriel Lawrence, and exhibited early signs of Alzheimer's disease. He mentions he has worked in the U.S. Army in the past, which is, of course, a shout out to MASH, because that's what MASH stands for, Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. So that's what people are like, oh, he went on, since he has Alzheimer's, he doesn't remember his name. But I don't know. This one is something that I knew within my research of the show, because I'm the type of person, like, once I start liking either an actor or a TV series or a movie, I read up on it because I want to know all of the facts of the movie, hence why my last Tombstone movie video was made, because I looked up way too many random facts about that movie. But Hawkeye was inspired by a real person. Now, the TV show was inspired by a movie, which I haven't seen, but I've heard is not as good as the TV show. And then the movie was based on a book series by Richard. Oh my gosh! Really? I will be through in a minute. Out. But the book series was written by Richard Booker. Is that what his name? Hooker, not Booker. But it's like an entire novel series. But he used his real life experiences to write the book, and Hawkeye was based on his persona. And when he saw the TV show, he absolutely hated the way that Alan Alda portrayed Hawkeye and how the TV show portrayed Hawkeye, because he was not a womanizer, which Hawkeye clearly is. And, like, he said that the original Hawkeye was patriotic and a married conservative, but in the TV show, he has more democratic leanings, I would say, or like liberal views. And of course, he's a womanizer. So the person that wrote the MASH books doesn't like the way that Alan Alda portrayed Hawkeye, but, to each their own. And even though he wrote the series, I mean, ultimately MASH is known for the TV show, not the books, so, it's whatever. But those are the facts I have. I will say that Alan Alda did a lot of the directing and a lot of writing for the show. He actually got an Emmy for that. He posted on Instagram. Yes, I follow Alan Alda on Instagram. Don't hate. But he posted a video recently where he won his Emmy for writing. And that's what in his book he talks about, how he was always interested in directing and writing, and he really got to do that on MASH. So there's like a little bit more into the series. You'll see it's like written by Alan Alda, directed by Alan Alda, produced by Alan Alda.
Directed by Rabbit, written by Rabbit, from an original idea by Rabbit, based on a notion by Rabbit, starring the others.
And he even had his father and brother in a couple of episodes, too. So I wouldn't go as far as saying that Alan Alda made MASH, because it was a combination of all of the characters. But he had a big part in it. But I absolutely love MASH, like I've talked about, and I'm going to talk about in a future video. It got me through middle school and getting bullied, and sometimes during the day it would be the only time that I had smiled or laughed is watching MASH for that day. So it will always hold a special place in my heart. And yeah, I'm glad that I got to share these facts with you. I will have some stuff linked in the down bar, that website, if I can find it, but I'll also have Alan Aldo's books and his Instagram and Twitter linked down below. I follow Loretta Swit on Instagram and Twitter, and she's actually, not toot my own horn, but she's reposted some of my stuff on Instagram. Not, bragging or anything. But I will have her follow links down below. I think that's all who's on social media, honestly. But I do know the only one still alive from the show is Alan Alda, Loretta Swit, Gary Berghoff, Mike Farrell, and Jamie Farr. I think that's it. Yeah. Yep, that's it. Everyone else has died, which is really sad. But yeah, I am so glad that I got to do this episode. What am I doing? Making a TV show? I am so excited that I got to do this video for you all. I hope that you enjoy it. Look at those things that I have in the down bar to learn more, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys.
All that's left is a window to my soul. Come and get it.